So we are now recording and we'll start our Zoom session officially. I guess this is our sixth Zoom meeting. And well, Tim has got the screen. Why don't you show us what you got on your wrist and tell us if you have anything new?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do, because I just have this is just an old Seiko 5, uh, but I love Seiko because Dave Cooper would like this. I love Seiko because I can afford them. They're very, very affordable, But this is something I got the other day, um, and I saw this on eBay. And I just have to say, I loved the look of it. I just thought it was just magnificent. And I thought, boy, I want to have that sucker on my arm. And you can see there's a little E there in a diamond. And it turns out that this is from the Eaton Department Store Company of Canada. So here's this is the back, and the mark on the back is Scepter, which supposedly was a submark of Star Watch Case Company. But according to what I heard, Scepter was for gold-filled cases, and this is definitely not gold-filled. In fact, from the weight of it and the feel of it and everything, the look of it, I think it's silver. Anyway, here's the crown and a little reading on the side of the watch. I just bring this up because it's kind of an interesting thing to me. Never seen this before. This crown works normally. You pull it out to set the watch, but when it's in its sort of neutral position, you can't wind it. You have to push the crown in to engage the winding. And then when you release it, it just sort of spins. You could feel a little ratcheting action, but I'd never seen that before. So here's the works. It's a 17 jewel, and you can see the jewel settings and all that kind of stuff. I don't know anything about it. I put an inquiry on the NAWCC message board. There is some research that says that Eaton at one point was purchasing watches from a Gallet of all people. And so I suppose it's not impossible that this is actually a Gallet. Later on in their history, Eaton, to honor employees who had 25 years or more of service to the company, Eaton started giving 25-year employees Rolexes. And they gave everybody a Rolex. It was private labeled with the Eaton name on the front, but it was definitely made for them by Rolex. And it had around the dial, it had quarter century club. In other words, 1/4 at the 12, and then CENTURY going around, and club. And these things were apparently highly prized. I can't even imagine what kind of a company would give you a Rolex for 25 years of service nowadays. But Eaton's apparently did, and they were huge in Canada. They were every bit as important as Sears Roebuck down here. And they went out of business and they started in 1869 and finally went out of business in 1999. Their assets and marks and whatnot were purchased by Sears, and Sears tried to reintroduce an Eaton catalog, but it didn't go over very well. But there is still an Eaton Center in Toronto, and I believe also in Winnipeg. But in any event, this is this is the watch that I got. There's the so to speak, logo. You can see up at the top, it says the T. Eaton Company. That was very characteristic. For some reason, the Eaton stores kept that the in the name. And so, there it is. That's my find for this month.
That's a very nice looking watch. I like the engraving on the side, and I'm a fan of the cushion case. Looks like it's maybe a triple sunk dial, and the 24-hour markers are
Yeah,
very unusual.
yeah. And
It's
it's
a great-
also, by the way, that's a glass crystal. It's not an acrylic.
I was going to say it looks like it's made out of recycled Coke bottles.
Yeah. Well, I think that's my bad lighting, partly.
I like the green tip. So the observation that I have is that the scepter is a trademark that was registered to STAR. That does indicate that it was gold fill.
Can't hear you very well, Jack.
Oh,
Yeah, your mic is bad. You need to start using a headphone, I think.
yeah, that might be the case. Or I could just sit closer. Does that help?
Yeah, it
That
does.
helps
Does
a
help,
lot.
yes.
All right. So the scepter trademark was registered to STAR as gold fill, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a Gallet movement. Honestly, the way you're going to be able to tell that is looking at the setting bits. So, and it looks like it might also be a negative set movement as well too. And
What's that?
A negative
Lost.
set movement.
Ah,
So, and Gallet did make negative set movement. One thing you are missing is the two holes there on the balance cog shows that there was a swan neck regulator at one point.
interesting. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
All right. Well, nice watch. Nice to see that. So we've got a couple more people have joined us. Dan Schwartz and Lucas has joined us, and as well as Mike Wingert. So nice to see you, gentlemen, all of you. And who wants to go next with what's new or on their wrist today?
Well, I can go next.
Okay.
I have a few kind of interesting things. First of all, I have my very cool 1920s Benris, the civilian, I believe the civilian aviator is what they called it. And sort of a really cool design of watch, smaller acrylic on this one, which is, what I like to see. Very unusual. I like some of the quirkier old stuff. And actually, if any of you are familiar with Reddit, I just made a subreddit for weird and quirky watches last night. I noticed there was no R-obscure watches. So if you're familiar with Reddit, I posted a link to it up on r/watches. But I have this, which is or was actually my grandpa's watch. This is a very cool little Zodiac, and all of these watches I just got working recently. And this is from, I think, 72 or 73. And I've seen these watches before in steel with sort of the red vegetable dyed aluminum bezels, but I haven't really seen them. This is gold plated, of course, because it's from the 70s. But I haven't really seen them at all in gold and blue, which is actually pretty cool. I think you guys have seen this watch before. I think I've showed it off. Little diving watch I got from Amazon, reminded me of a Tag Heuer. Cool little display case back. It's got a little Chinese movement. I think it says what kind of movement it is in there. It's a CA301294. Then this is a new watch, which I have not shown off, I don't think. This was the cheapest automatic watch on Amazon that I could find. This is a $16, it was a $16 watch last summer. They kind of fluctuate. This is from ESS. It's actually a pretty decent looking timepiece. It feels cheap. The strap is pretty bad, but it's still a fun watch to have, especially for something that I don't particularly care too much about, that looks relatively new, that I can, like wear around the house and stuff. Now, I do have something that I have not shown off.
Where else would you wear it these days?
Well, yeah, well, that's true. I don't know. I mean, I can always wear it to the watchmates as well.
That's true.
Yeah. And then I got this, which I don't believe anyone has seen yet. If I can get it to focus. There we go. A little Rakita 24-hour watch. Very cool. It's got the rotating bezel. Some people call it the Submariner. I call it the Arctic because it's very clearly not related to a Rolex Submariner in any way whatsoever. But, it's a cool little watch. I have it on this strap. I can show you the back here. This has got Rakita's 2420 or 2623N movement in it. And I have a Rakita World Timer with a day date, and that watch has the 2426M in it. And actually, if you're going to buy like a Soviet watch, I would definitely recommend Rakita. Vostok has quite the reputation, if I say so myself, but Rakita is definitely, I got one, the World Timer that I got from Rakita was filled with gunk, filled with corrosion, still working and still keeping time. And it clearly had not been cleaned since 1990 something. It hadn't been cleaned since the Soviet Union collapsed, is what I would imagine, if it was cleaned at all. But it was running, it was keeping time. Calendar is flicking over. Some of the paint on the calendar is missing, but yeah, definitely would recommend this brand if you're buying Soviet watches.
And that name means rocket.
Yes.
Rocket.
Yeah. And actually, I can throw up a link to the subreddit, my new subreddit, in the chat, so you guys can find it here.
Yeah, that'd be good. I haven't paid any attention to Reddit, but I know that it's got a very active watch group in it, and there's also a lot of selling that's going on with Reddit as well. So it's a decent sales platform, and with eBay starting to get into this authenticity guarantee, having to ship your watch to a third party who may or may not ship it to your customer, I think a lot of people are beginning to exit eBay as a selling platform.
It would be nice to have a good alternative, that's for sure.
Yeah, so we've got that up. So Dan, you want to tell us what you've got going on?
Yeah, I might have misread, but I prepared Longines because
Longines is it.
I thought, because I thought I read something about Longines. So that's what I was going to talk about. So I actually showed a couple of my military Longines last time. So I'm not going to show those, but I do have a couple of others. And then at the end, I have something really interesting to show you. So there's a tease for you. But Longines related. So I'll start with this chronograph, and I've shown this before. I don't know if everyone was on the same call when I showed this before. But this is my 13ZN Longines chronograph. You can see the extract from the archives. So it's a reference 5020 from 1942. And I think last time I showed this, I talked about the context was it was sort of had been a project, and I showed the pictures when I originally had it that the fixed lug bars had been drilled out, and I went through a bit of a saga trying to get it restored. But I'm very happy with this watch. I just think it's got a really beautiful dial. This is from the Anti-Magnetique series of these chronographs.
Yeah, I especially love the stepped lugs on that one.
Yeah, it's got the nice stepped lugs, and this dial is sort of this gilt dial that looks different from different angles. Like from certain angles, the outer rings look darker and the inner looks lighter. And then if I don't know, sometimes there's an angle I can find where it actually sort of flips. But I opened the back because I wanted to let people have a look at the movement, which I think is really beautiful in these 13ZNs.
Nice and clean. You had that serviced by
Bruno did this actually. Yeah, Bruno serviced this. So it's pretty freshly serviced earlier this year. Although to be perfectly honest, the movement wasn't bad. At least, well, visually it wasn't bad when I purchased it, although it wasn't actually working. But it's, you can tell that this was a high-end movement for Longines. They the Swiss brands don't have a lot of decoration usually, but they really put nice kind of bevels on all the parts and tried to make it look nice. So that's, I've shown that before, but I wanted to show that again. I think that the other watches, I think the one I'll focus more on today. So this is a Longines flagship. Sorry, there's some lag. There we go. So this is a Longines flagship. Here's I should show the extract. So this is from 1958. It's got a 30L movement in it, which was quite a common movement, that manual winding movement that Longines used for a long time. What's quite unusual about this one is that it's a chronometer, and so there are only apparently a few hundred of these flagships that were made as chronometer versions. And so anyway, that's the dial. And the other, well, kind of the thing about these flagships is they have, unfortunately, in this case, a bit worn, but maybe you can see if I kind of move it around to different angles, it's an engraved like a Spanish galleon, like a big ship, which is,
Yeah, we can see that.
which is the case back engraving. And then I kind of loosen this so I can take it off. I don't know that you'll really be able to see without a good comparison for a standard 30L movement, but the 30L chronometer grade movements are distinctive because they have an overcoil hairspring, which of course is going to be hard for you to see. But also the stud, has just a different shape. So they made some small modifications to the balance, basically, of these chronometer grade ones, which was interesting. Really, they just made a few hundred for testing, and it's just sort of odd that they would do that, and even to make a modification for just a few hundred. But so I think these are fun to have because they're unusual. The thing I wanted to show you is associated, like generally speaking, with these extracts of the archive. So probably you've all seen these before. If you have a Longines, they will do historical research for no cost if you just log into their website, create an account, and upload a few photos and numbers from the movement and case, and then within a few days you'll get an email, and then yeah, and then within a week or two they actually send you this in the mail for free, which is really nice, and it has this sort of information on it which confirms things for you. But so they have these things called the quote unquote archives that they go into and they do research and kind of send you this extract in this sort of format. But to me, it was always a bit of a black box, like what is meant by archives. And I actually, before I show you that, I'm going to show you this. So this was some period advertising for this exact chronometer version of this Longines flagship, which I found, which was kind of cool. But the really amazing thing is this, which is the actual archive. So I don't know if any have you ever seen this before, because this is absolutely the only time I've ever seen a picture of what the Longines archives looks like. They are pretty secretive about it. They don't like to send out the raw archives because if you see enough of it, you could sort of extract information they don't want to give, like how many of certain things were made and things like that, which for some reason they don't like that information known. So my watch is this down here, this 7. It's 10383837. So it's this line, and you can see that they have batches of 10. You know, so this batch up here is the 10383811 through, you know, the next 10, and so they kind of do them in batches of 10, and then they have these handwritten or stamps for who they sent it to, and then there's sometimes there are blank lines, you know, because they sent like 4 or 5 of these to Baum, and so they don't stamp every line. It's just sort of continued from there, and then they have all this other information handwritten in there, which is pretty hard to interpret sometimes. You know, sometimes you can figure it out like, okay, these are all 30L movements, they're rhodium plated movements, 17 joules, etc. But like some of these other things are not very clear what they're meant by. The dates are pretty clear, like so July 17th, 1958, although the 8 is sort of blurred. July 17th, that is the date that's on my extract. So that's what that means, that stamp. And so when you request an extract from the archive, it might be something like this that they're going back to look at, to try to, you know, pull out the information that's going onto that extract. So I don't know.
Did you ask him for that image of that page? How did you get it?
So the person I bought it from had this, and he has a longstanding relationship with the archivist at Longines. But even her name is Jennifer, blanking on her last name, but even like she won't usually send these things to him, but he had gotten into sort of a long back and forth with her about these Longines chronometers, these 30L chronometers, asking some questions about how many there were and how she knew this and how she knew that. And she like ultimately just sent him this page so he could see how she was interpreting the information. And then he also sent me the email exchange that they had, and it seemed like after the fact she sort of regretted it because she said like, please don't share this with anybody. But yeah, they don't generally do it. They don't generally share the actual images of their archives. But so I thought it would be fun for any of you who are sort of Longines aficionados. I thought it would be fun to see the archives because it's the only one I've ever seen.
Well, that's really interesting. Do you think that they did a different balance on the chronometers as well? A higher grade balance?
Well, it's a different hairspring. Sorry, yeah, it is. It definitely is. So it's a different hairspring, and it has, you know, the balance itself is different. It has different, like the shape of the studs or knobs, I don't know what they're called, are different. So the balance is different, including a different hairspring, and the stud carrier is different.
Okay, so they'd have a different balance cock probably as well, possibly,
Balance cock, except for the stud carrier, looks pretty much the same, but the stud carrier is a different shape. So yeah, I think it is probably just the whole balance is different, which is kind of shocking for such a small batch. But apparently they were really interested in getting and being able to say, you know, that they had this chronometer grade flagship. You know, this was in that era where you know, a lot of these Swiss companies were competing pretty heavily in the observatory trials, and you know, it was sort of a point of pride for them to make these chronometer grade movements.
Yes, it was a very big deal, the chronometer trials. They stopped it when Seiko started beating
Right.
beating them in every one of them, and they've only
Right.
restarted them, you know, in the recent past. So
right. Yeah, they like after the first couple of years with Seiko, they just said, okay, only Swiss, but then that sort of became embarrassing and they just stopped it.
Yeah. They temporarily suspended it, and there's a long article on it on Quill and Pad or Fratello watches or something that I once read. So Richard, Tung, do you have anything you want to share with us? If you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks for letting me crash your party here. I know I'm an interloper of sorts. Thank you, Jack, for inviting me.
I was going to say,
so
invited guest.
I'm not sure how well that you can see this. It's a Hamilton from 1935, a Turner model. Let's see what I can tell you about this. It's a 10-karat gold-filled case, and it houses a 987 E grade movement. It's a number 6/0 size movement. And what is somewhat interesting about this particular model is that it's got an enameled dial as opposed to the more common applied gold numeral dial. And I actually have another brother of its kind that with a slightly different dial that's got a combination of numerals and markers. So I was mentioning to Tim, I've been trying to, it's a little bit like Pokemon Go, got to get them all, right? So I've been trying to track down some of these enamel style dials, and this one that was one that just recently came up. It has not been cleaned or serviced, but it runs fast. And I'm sure that Jack's going to get some annoying note from me saying, what's going on with this movement and how do I fix it? So anyway, just a modest pickup this last week. But again, thanks for including me. I really appreciated, Dan, I think your Longines presentation. I think I'm going to run out and find the one Longines I have and try to have it looked up in the archives now. So thanks for that tip. That was terrific.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, Dan, you're muted. So
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that. I mean, Longines, it's just a fantastic manufacturer. It's just in modern days, it's just so nothing special really. But back in the mid-century, it was second to none in every way, and it is really fun that the way they've done such a good job with still supporting people who are interested in the historical watches.
they are remarkable in that, and when I start my presentation, you'll see the books of the archive and other things. Those are visible in their museum that you can tour. They don't let you touch them, but they're there. So Mike,
growing up, I remember listening to the radio at home, and on the radio when I was growing up, it was like Longines was a frequent advertiser, and their slogan was "the world's most honored watch."
they had a series of slogans, and that one was one of their big ones. And the U.S. market was exceptionally important to them as well. Mike, you want to? I see we're handling something there on your workbench. What have you got for us?
I'm just really piddling around, Tim. I don't have a whole lot of interest to share right now. Just enjoying everybody else's comments.
Okay, but so last time you had mentioned that you were working on Waltham 8-day clocks some, and we should do a presentation on them because they did a lot and they're really great things.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on this dual mainspring Waltham right now, which I don't really have any experience with, and I don't know, just kind of fiddling around with that. Something's not right.
I will say that I have a lot of Waltham 8-day parts. I bought 2 large sorted lots, and so if you run into parts needs, send me an email and I'll see if I can help you.
Oh, that's kind of you. Thank you.
So, okay. Jack, you want to jump in?
Well, you should see 3 watches now. Are you able to see anything?
Yes, we see them. I like that square one a lot.
Well, we'll talk about that one first. And let me do presentation mode. Here we go. So I have to say that I very much like Longines. From a technological standpoint, they're phenomenal to work on. I have owned four Longines, and one I sold, and the second it left my hands, I regretted it. And so I'm down to 3 now. But the first one is this one, and this has a redone dial, but it is has a distinction of being the first collectible watch that I bought. When I was living in Chicago, and shortly after I met my wife, I was talking with a watchmaker in Chicago whose shop was smaller than my office, and he'd been in that shop for 50 years. He was well into his 80s, had worked continuously since coming to the United States right after the Second World War. And I asked him if he had any gold watches that he wanted to sell. And he pulled this one out. He told me that Longines was a good brand and that he would sell this to me at a good price. And I asked him where he got it, and he told me that a customer had left it and never picked it up, but it's been more than 20 years. So he thought he could sell it. And so he serviced it and sold it to me. And honestly, I've forgotten what I paid for it, but in hindsight, I can say that it was a ridiculously low price for what it was. It has has the 22L movement. This is not the movement that's in the watch. I have been somewhat disappointed that the dial was unoriginal, and have been on the hunt for original dials and have bought 2. I think this one I will have will reuse it in the watch, because it actually will. I think it should be the dial that's on the watch, because the other examples of the square ones tend to be a little more on the ostentatious side with the set diamonds at the hour figures. This one has had the lacquer turn brown, but I think it should come off. I believe the numbers underlying are all hard enamel. So for the $15 eBay deal, I think I'm willing to risk it to find out if they come off or not.
So when you remove the lacquer, do you use just water or some slight acid like lemon juice or vinegar?
I haven't tried lemon juice or vinegar, but what I have done is I use household ammonia. And what I do is I will take a dish of water, submerge the dial in the water, and then slowly add a little bit of the ammonia solution until I begin to see the lacquer coming up. That way it comes off slowly and doesn't try to dig too deep into underlying material. What I will do is if the lacquer does come off successfully, and sometimes you can coax things along with a Q-tip, I'll go over it with matte acrylic, which I think the matte finish is probably what was originally the lacquer on there. And the acrylic will not age as badly. So, but hopefully this will work out. The next one is one that I brought to a meeting in the past, and I think Dan has seen this one. The image in the upper left corner, I believe, Tim, you took when I brought it to the meeting. This is a military level style watch. It features a 23M movement and has fully signed Longines case. The matching serial numbers between the movement bezel and the case back. And so the 23M was introduced during World War II. And let's see, it's a 16 jewel, that extra jewel being on top of the second pinion. They're in the center. And then I also emailed Longines, and this is what they wrote back to tell me about the watch. And I apparently just missed World War II with it, having been invoiced to Wittenauer in November of 1945. And then the last one that I have is a earlier watch. So I've been trying to go in a chronological order. The square watch is from 1950, the mid-50s. I actually can't find the extract or the information from the archives that they emailed back to me when I inquired about it. But this one I bought through a source other than eBay. I bought it off of Facebook, and The seller had said that they were interested in getting it repaired, and I told them that it would probably cost them $150, and they said, well, how much would you pay for it? And I offered him $75, and unfortunately his images did not show the scratch marks here next to the detent screw. He had completely and utterly stripped out the detent screw trying to get the crown out, and so I ended up having to replace several parts on this, but was able to bring it back into a very good running service. It's a solid sterling case, and at one point in time, Longines, if they were factory cased, they had the serial numbers on the movement and as well as the case. They're paired, and so this is one of the things that I always tell novice Longines collectors, that if you're going to start early, make sure you are looking for watches that were factory cased with the matching serial numbers, because Longines provided movements to companies like department stores, like Baum or Hertz in Canada. They often did not mark the movements, and the serial numbers are under the dial. But the serial number would be still marked on the case if it was a factory supplied case, and you can then reference that to the general lists of serial numbers that are out there on the internet. So this one is the last one to show, and also I ran this through Longines, and they came back and told me it had been sold in 1925. But the 1334 caliber is a much older caliber. They had started producing these around 1905, so it is the movement that's probably most common in the trench style watches that Longines has. And that's partially why I bought this one, because I was interested in that size movement. It's a 13 line size, which is fairly substantial for the 1920s. That's it.
Well, that's a nice little grouping of watches, and I like the that last one quite a bit as well. Yes.
Yeah, it's quite a nice watch.
Now, before we all leave here, I was going to ask you guys something. I am going to be looking for a copy of George Daniels' Watchmaking, and I've kind of built my tool collection up, and I'm going to start to try working my way through that. And I was wondering if you guys had anything that you could tell me or warn me about before I dive headfirst in.
You're asking if you buy it, about buying the book, or I didn't understand the question.
Well, first of all, does anyone have like a copy of the book that I could buy? Because I've been looking at. Okay. Yeah, I've been looking at the copies on Amazon, and I mean, you can get one as cheap as $60. I'm not looking for anything vintage or collectible or valuable, because I'm anticipating this to just be sort of like a cookbook that gets a little stained but is well loved, and instead of making food, I'm making watches.
So $60 isn't a bad price for that book new. It's now currently being reprinted, and so the prices have come down. You might take a look on the AWCI website and see if it's any cheaper there.
Yeah, AWCI?
Yeah, the American Watch and Clock Institute. But they have a bookstore, and they sell books at a discount. And I think it's on Amazon. They have a store through Amazon. The other book that they sell that is worth getting, if you don't have it already, is the Bulova School of Watchmaking book. That's a classic and goes through a lot of things that are very useful.
I was going to say, Lucas, that George Daniels' book is really at the technical end of the spectrum for watchmaking, and that based on what I know about your skills, I think like the Bulova book would be an excellent recommendation. If you don't have the Chicago School book, it's in print, and I think it's $20. And it's available through Lulu Books. And you might also consider getting one of the copies supplied. Fry's latest edition, I believe, is still available through the AWCI website. You can get older editions at reasonable price. So yeah, I think Daniels is it's not something that I particularly recommend to others who are starting out. It is very interesting from a technical standpoint because it really is one of the few books out there that is documenting methodologies for making tools for horology, as well as making the parts. It's not really a textbook. It's not a how-to really. I think you'll find that the others are a how-to.
I believe that if you go on the NAWCC message board, you can find a link to a PDF of the Chicago School book.
Oh, okay.
And I also would look on ABE books for anything used, because sometimes my experience suggests that if you look on a site that has a lot of watch and clock people, the prices will be higher than if you go to a general used book site where they don't know what the hell they're looking at and they have no interest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got the American Watchmakers Institute, and I've also got the Bull of a School. Where'd you say it was? On the NWACC website?
Yeah, it's on the message board, on the NAWCC message board. You just have to search for Chicago School, and you'll probably turn up. And somebody had a link to a PDF of the Chicago School book.
I'll also say that, and Rex asked me to repeat at this time, that his deceased friend's estate book collection, there are some watchmaking books in there. And if you didn't look at that email, take a look at it if you still have it, and I'll probably send it out one more time. There are some books in there as well. I think the Don DeCarl book, I think, is one of the classics, old timers. But I would agree, George Daniels' book is a really epic book, but it has a chapter on how to make jewels, and so yeah, making jewels is interesting. And guilloche, that was my reference book for guilloche. But if you're just doing repair, that's not the book for you.
Well, actually, no. I'm using kind of repair as I've been using repair as a bridge to start making watches.
So, okay. Well, that's the book that you want. And then again, Time Zone and the Purist and Watch You Seek, those guys are building, some of those guys are building their own watches, and YouTube has a plethora of people making watch stuff. So, search that stuff out as well.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Where did you say? Trying to keep all this together here. Where did you say on the NWACC website where I could find that?
Message board.
Message. Okay.
If you've never been to the message board, I mean, frankly, I'm stunned if you've never been to the message board. But the fact of the matter is, you can post a question on damn near any horological subject, and within 5 minutes, there'll be 10 replies. Some of them very knowledgeable, some of them completely bogus. But the fact of the matter is it's a huge resource, especially for somebody who's a rank amateur like me.
I see Tim Orr has sent a link to the Chicago School PDF on the chat, so take a look there. All right, so here is these are the archives with in the Longines Museum. And so the Longines factory is in a little town called St. Immer. I can't pronounce it properly, but that's because I am an American. And the original factory, the original company was started in 1932. And it was started by Auguste Agassiz, and he has a brother who is famous in the US and elsewhere as a biologist. He settled in the US, and there's a number of places in the US named Agassiz after the family name. But the original Longines company was founded in 1832 with two lawyer partners, and they were selling watches that were produced in what they called assemblage or something, or basically in the St. Eimer area, there are all families that specialized in specific parts, hands, pivots, you name it, screws. They would specialize in it, and you would have a kind of high level person, higher level company that would take all these pieces and complete the watches and sell them. And that's what the original Longines company did under Agassiz. And after 14 years or so, his Agassiz partners left and retired, and August brought in his nephew, Ernest Francilian, who was a economist, and but he was quite sharp, and they were still doing their watches by assemblage techniques, but Ernest went ahead and looked to actually start a bigger factory or facility. And so they bought 2 plots of land along the river in St. Eimer, and they built their first building in 1867, and they called it Les Longines, for is basically a long meadow or a long pasture. That building still stands today. It is actually a historical site. I don't know how much production goes on there, but I think there's probably quite a bit of assembly that goes on there, and design work and other support stuff. So anybody can visit the Longines Museum. You have to make an appointment for it, and you do that on the website by creating an account, doing the same thing that you do when you ask for an archive, for example. Now, in my situation, I was staying in BL, which is the hometown for the Swatch Group and Omega and such, and so you take the train, and I didn't bother to pay attention to the train schedule when I booked my tour for the museum. I just decided, well, when's a good time, and I set it, and then I looked later when I got to Switzerland. I'm looking at the train schedule, and the train goes hourly between BL and Chauffons and beyond. So I had to catch an early train, and I got to St. Immer with a bunch of time to spare. So this is the countryside of Switzerland as you're traveling by train through the valley, very green. This was after the hottest, driest, most drought-like summer Switzerland had ever seen. But you can see it's pretty green, and the heat had broken, which was a good thing because they don't have air conditioning in Switzerland very much. And the summer temperatures were over 100. So a hotel room at 100 degrees in Switzerland is not in my idea of fun. This is a train station at St. Immer, and that's actually the Longines factory right there in the trees. And there's a walkway down to the factory that goes straight from the train station. And there's a factory there. But I had some time to kill, so I wandered around town for a little bit. And they had these pillar kind of kiosks things throughout the town. The town itself is also historic. And they show pictures of life in the watch factories, in St. Immer, and there's a guy with a Rose engine, and they're talking about various aspects of it. And this is kind of interesting. This is a quote from Jules Jurgensen. He's the 4th generation of the Jules Jurgensen family, and he was born in Les Locques, which is at the end of the train line. That's the same train line that you take to St. Immer. And he's complaining about the factory setup. He's saying, building an enormous hangar with windows and lathes and tools and all this sort of stuff. He prefers in doing it by hand and transferring the knowledge, father to son, and gentle touch and precise know-how and how to use a file and a burn-in or a burnisher. So he said this in 1881. About the same time in the Jules Jurgensen book, a person talks about visiting this very same Jules Jurgensen at his factory in Laylock. And the Jules Jurgensen factory had 3 people employed in the factory. At the same time, Longines had hundreds, as a comparison. Anyway, this area was also stunningly a hotbed of the anarchist movement, 18 to 1900s. And I'm not sure why, but there's a lot of Wikipedia entry on it, and I haven't bothered looking into it. So here they're talking about giving some relief to the factory workers, 11-hour days with Sundays off, and getting children out of the factory. This I thought was real interesting, that in the mid 1800s, you got paid twice a year, on St. George's Day, April 23rd, and St. Martin's Day, November 11th, which was yesterday. And for the remaining 6 months, you either lived off your savings or you lived on the tick, or meaning credit. It was only later that the factory started going to later or more regular pay schedules. So this is the typical Swiss town. There's like 3 roads that run linearly through it, and it's built up on a hillside. So you just start wandering, through town, and you find these little walkways that lead up, little spigot there. The town, right, actually existed in Roman times. So there's a lot of historic stuff. Started as a Catholic town, and then with the Protestant Reformation, it became Protestant, and now, they have 2 churches, a Protestant and a Catholic, which is pretty typical. These are just scenes of some of the buildings around there. As you climb farther up the hillside, along these little walkways, you eventually hit, little forested pathways, and it's all very, very scenic, rather small, a lot of interesting characters. This guy is a pigeon, a homing pigeon kind of person. So these are views of the town as I'm headed back to the factory, even agricultural. But now we're back to the Longines factory, and tour guide was a Italian gentleman who does a lot of these archive extracts, and I don't remember his name, and I have his card somewheres, but I didn't find it for this meeting. So anyway, this is the archives. And there's also Wittenauer archives as well, because they partnered with Wittenauer for over 150 years, and they eventually owned the Wittenauer name up until 1995, when the Swatch Group took over the holding company for Longines Wittenauer, and they eventually sold the Wittenauer name to Bulova. And so that's under the Bulova arm, but Bulova is owned by Citizens Watch out of Japan. So it's all very interesting. So they show, a picture of the books, although this one is, kind of not a whole lot of information on these pages, and I'm not sure what that is. The museum has bigger displays, and they dedicate a lot of it to the Weems and the hour angle watches. And the Weems watch and the hour angle was used by Charles Lindbergh for navigation, as well as a lot of other famous aviators, including Amelia Earhart. So they have this display of a lot of Weems stuff and how it worked, and some historical kind of looking drawings of some early Weems Longines watches. The Weems watch, for those who don't know, the center dial is kind of the seconds dial that can be rotated with this crown off down at 4 o'clock, and that allowed you to synchronize the seconds to the second hand without hacking the watch. And I'm not sure why hacking wasn't so obvious of a thing to do, but it is what they did. And I think these must be degrees around there. I actually don't know how to use a Weems watch or an hour angle watch, but their watches they still do reproductions of this watch, although they don't have the movable center seconds indicator. And the historic Weems watches go for insane prices at auction. And their displays these are modern implementations, just looking at them. Some pictures of some aviator explorer type. They also did compasses during the war. They're a big supplier of the U.S. government, as well as Wittenauer. This is a watch that you see a lot with American collectors. Up down indicator, general time. They also made equipment as well, and this is a high precision micrometer. Well, actually, they're showing this is a watch right here. This is a quartz watch. Now I understand what I'm looking at. This is one of these thin watches. They did a thin quartz like Omega and Concord. They did a delirium thing. Some displays of parts under production. And then I mostly took a lot of pictures of timers and things. They did a lot of sporting things that became one of their trademarks. And here's a starting and finishing kind of timer. So they use thread in this particular case. There's a spool of thread on the left, a switch plunger mechanism down here, and it's the spool is braked and it's stretched across to a clamp. And when you went through the start or went through the finish gate, you'd break the thread and that would release this plunger switch on the side, and that would start or stop the timer. A few pictures of that. I thought that was kind of fascinating. And then these are dive watches. They also were big on dive stuff. I've got one of these watches here, but I don't have much of my Longines collection with me here because I have them stored away elsewhere. And they did these big stopwatches for sports timing. They didn't so much do Olympic stuff. Omega had that thing, but they did a lot of horse racing and tennis and car racing. Those were their big areas of timing expertise. So more big timing kinds of devices. And then we get into quartz, and they actually got involved in quartz in the 50s, and they started building these clocks and other things that used kind of a traditional watch mechanism, but they had a quartz driven motor driving the movement train. So they sometimes call those electromech kinds of devices. I had a couple different ones, and a chronometer movement that they submitted for observatory trials. And this is showing that thin watch inside kind of the mechanism of the gear train with a little motor up there driven by a quartz mechanism, pocket for the battery. And that's another picture of those. And then we got, the museum has a lot of art stuff in it. So these are skeletonized, those are stopwatches like that one I showed before, but they're skeletonized and engraved and decorated. And then more kind of art stuff. They really focused more of this kind of things in their museum and not so much on movements. So form watches, enameled watches. The Omega Museum has similar kinds of things, but the Omega Museum shows a lot more of their movements as well, and technical sides of things. This decoration is pretty crazy. That's one of those vibrating engraver things, like people crudely engrave their names and driver's license number and social security numbers on stuff that they had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But, you can use that as a decorative treatment as well, and more skeletonized and jeweled stuff. Something for the Islamic market or the Turkish market. And these are modern watches. Yeah, so these are, we've gotten into their modern collection. So as you can tell on this particular one, this is a fairly small movement in a giant case. And that's my biggest complaint with Longines these days, is they're doing a lot of oversized stuff with small movements. And I just am not a big fan of that kind of thing. But that's the extent of that. Stop that, and we can share screen, go to Wikipedia. Yeah, this is just talking about the town itself, and kind of shows where it is. It's right on the border here. This is France, I believe, over here. Basel is right here. So there's France and there's Germany, and Basel is like right at the tip there. And Saint Immer was originally under the control of the Archbishop of Basel, and the Archbishop owned all of that. And he gave a chunk of land to a hermit there that became a saint, and that's why it's Saint Immer, is 17th century saint. You know, and there's a Longines entry here that goes on. Changing the subject slightly, Jones and Horan at their last big auction had this Longines 30ch chronograph wristwatch in gold, and it's really a spectacular example. And that thing, I bid on it. I quit at like $3,600 or maybe it's 5,000, and it ended up at 9,600, and probably would have gone over 10,000. But the dial is in really spectacular shape. It was a really nice one. Couple other things, you know, just on the history of Longines. It was, you know, and after they built their factory in 1867, they basically still did things under the assemblage format of independent people doing work, but they're letting them do it in the bigger building. And later on, the nephew, Ernst Francilian, brought in a talented engineer named Jacques David, who started developing machinery not so much to build their own movements, but to aid the people that were doing the work. But later on, they started incorporating more and more production methods themselves and started building the movements, including what the frame, or the skeleton as they called it, in-house. And prior to that, they were getting them from other companies, like a company called Rotary, supplied a lot of things. They were the first. They have the oldest existing trademark from 1889, which is the Longines name and the winged hourglass. And they registered the trademark then because, to their dismay, the Longines watches were getting a good reputation and they're being counterfeited. So they started to try and protect their things with trademarks, and that was also part of their record keeping, as the record keeping allowed them to keep track of stuff that they actually built versus something that was a fake. So the wing trademark is the oldest continuously used trademark in the world. And you know, they basically started developing the mass production methods like American firms did. And they went to in 1876, there was a universal exhibition in Philadelphia, and that was an international thing. So they brought in people from all over the world, and the Swiss sent a entourage there to present their watches and such. And that included Jacques David. And that's when they first encountered Waltham and Elgin, and they were looking at the quality of these watches, and they were pretty much writing on the wall for the Swiss people that wanted to do things the old way, such as Jules Jurgensen. The Hamilton, or not a Hamilton, but a Waltham watch could be bought for like $30. And you could, as a jeweler, if you bought a bunch of them, you could get them price like $15. And an equivalent Jules Jurgensen watch was 10 times that cost, plus a 25% import duty tax on them. And so, you know, the Swiss entourage came back and said, you know, we really have to start thinking about this industrialization and moving away from this protected home hierarchy of things and upscale the production. And so Longines was one of the first companies to do that. And they built their own machinery, and they were quite successful at it. And the U.S. market was really important to them, partially because August Agus's famous brother Louis had settled in the U.S. in 1847 and lived the rest of his life there. but they had also had signed a distribution agreement with a New York firm, which they maintained for a long period of time. So the American market was really important, and they had to compete with the Americans on price, and you could only do that in the market space that Longines was operating in by mass production. So they continued to build their own movements up until the 60s through the 70s. And then, they became under the holding arm of a group, ESA and SMH, which eventually became the Swatch Group. And, at that point, they were getting their movements from ETA, which wasn't under the ownership of the Swatch Group yet, but was the big supplier of movements for a lot of people. So, yeah, let's see. In the case of Wittenauer, Wittenauer was involved with Longines from 1870 through 1995 and was bought in 1950 by Longines and became Longines Wittenauer up until 1995. So that is kind of my rambling presentation on the history of Longines.
With respect to that Longines Wittenauer, you'll see a lot of mid-century Longines that were, imported by Wittenauer and cased in U.S. made cases, often by Star, like we saw earlier today, that case from the Star company. And you just see tons of text inside these cases. It's like Longines, Wittenauer, Star, all these things, because they were, I guess, saving on import duties by importing uncased movements, and
right,
sometimes lower jeweled movements too.
Yeah, you saw a lot of those cased and timed in New York, but they had the brand name. So did the slides advance through there? Did the share screen actually work in the end? Okay.
Yeah, it worked quite nice. I was going to say that one of the main reasons that Longines and some of the other Swiss companies switched to using American cases is because of the tariffs changes in 1929. The Smoot-Hawley Act, which is famous from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, and that's why I tell people who are starting to collect Longines, because of the preponderance of fakes out there, is to stick to the factory cased ones before they begin to move on to the ones that might have been cased here in the U.S., either in Star or Wadsworth cases, which is the other one that I see them often.
Right.
Yeah, now I have something to add to the so I have something to add here. I forgot to show off. It's this little Wittenauer compass. It's got a big dent that I need to kind of hammer out, but I got this in a lot of watches from eBay, and it was a big watt. It was a lot of, I think it was just ETA parts, and for some reason this was in there. But it's cool. I've been kind of working on polishing it up, and I have a Longines, a very cool little ellipse style Longines from I think 71. And I mean, that watch is pretty much all original. It even has the original very nice mesh bracelet, but for some reason, the little regulator pin, the clip that holds it onto the tab for the balance cock, was broken. And I was able to mitigate that problem just by taking off the pin and very carefully, or taking off the little regulator arm and very carefully moving the hairspring up into the, what's the part with the pin that holds it in place? I don't remember the proper terminology. I have that watch down there right now. It's really not wanting to run. It's got more hairspring troubles, surprising, I know. So I've been looking for a new movement for it, or at the very least a new balance cock assembly that I could use. And I'd like to replace the hairspring as well, just because I've been fiddling around with it. I don't know how fatigued it is, and it is running fast. So I suspect it's either magnetized or it's got some sort of microfracture bend in it somewhere that either I can't tell because I have gone through and straightened it multiple times before, but it's still running fast.
If they're magnetized, that can make them run fast, but that's because it makes adjacent coils stick together, and that should be very obvious.
Yeah.
Here's a question from me. This, for whatever reason, has not occurred to me until today. But you did mention, Tim, that that Longines was supplying the U.S. government during the Second World War, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, bounded on the north by Germany, bounded on the south by Italy, bounded on the west by occupied France, bounded on the east by Austria. How the hell did they get the stuff out and
They
get it
supplied
here?
Britain. I don't know if they supplied the U.S., but they definitely did supply Britain.
They supplied the U.S.
Oh, did they?
No,
Okay.
actually, the U.S. any of the military contracts that Longines had with were left to expire by the beginning of the war, and because of the exact concern that Dan brings up, is how did they get it out of Switzerland? It was essentially the way Switzerland played the Allies and the Germans, and how they did business to make sure that they were able to continue to do exports, to get German steel, and to be able to then sell for American and British cash. And the way they were doing it is they had an agreement with the Germans to run through Vichy, France, and export out of there.
It's just really amazing that, they were really in a tough spot being where they were, and they grew all their own food. They didn't depend on anybody else for food, as I understand it. They wanted to maintain their independence in that respect, and they supplied both sides of the war with material.
Yeah.
There was a very famous congressional hearing in the 1943, I think, where one of the congressmen is complaining to the War Products Board about how the materials coming out of Switzerland are being made with Nazi steel. And I've got the clip and the congressional record highlighted saved as a JPEG somewhere on my computer. More warning, I can find it, but it's absolutely fascinating that anything that was made by the Swiss that involved steel, they were getting it from Krupp's. And Krupp's was the German stainless steel provider. There were only 3 in the world at the time: an American company, a British company, with the vast preponderance of steel produced in the world, at that time, was by Krupp's Industries in the 1940s.
On that note, I remember there was a meeting. Now, this is alleged, of course. This is the story that a lot of my family who is in the military likes to tell. And that's that the Nazi ambassador and the ambassador of Switzerland met at a little station at the border, and they were discussing invasion and treaties. And what the ambassador for Germany said was, "We have 40,000 men, you have 20,000 men. What would you do if we crossed your border?" And the Swiss said, "We would shoot twice and go home."
So, I wouldn't want to fight the Swiss. I think they would be pretty voracious fighters.
Well, they're all armed too, right?
Yep. They all have to do armed their service, and I think they're given a weapon, and they're expected to maintain proficiency.
Right.
So this is a one of these military watches, and I don't know what year it's from, and it's actually an Agassiz branded, which is a mystery to me, is quite how the Agassiz brand fits in with Longines. I assume it's Longines, but if you do a search on the Agassiz brand, you don't really find much about them as an independent brand, but you find stuff from the 60s still labeled Agassiz. So I don't quite understand all of that, and if any of you know that, I would appreciate it, but otherwise it's a mystery to me to figure out. But it's another chronograph looking thing, and I had a couple of those 13 ZN watches like Dan has. This one is a similar case, although my spring bars come out. and my dial has been redone, so it's very plain looking, and I think the case has been repolished at some point. And I have a smaller one as well that is the same movement. The strap out of the way, with also with the redone dial that is have a hard time when the camera is not oriented the same way that I am. But I really didn't know much about Longines mechanical chronographs until 2 days after the museum tour with Longines, and then I happened to meet Sebastian Chamonix, who was co-author of the book Chronographs for Collectors, and Alex Gottby, who directs Phillips auctions for watches in Geneva. And they kind of educated me on the significance of Longines chronographs. And so after that, I was kind of sorry that I didn't pay more attention to the chronographs at the museum, because it might have been more interesting to you guys. Prior to that, the only Longines chronograph I had was this tuning fork chronograph, which was based on the same movement as the Omega Speed Sonic. And this was came out during one of the 70s Olympics, but I don't remember which one. You know, I mostly have collected Longines pocket watches, and, you know, here's a 12 size thin movement that would have, you know, come out of some gold watch that the gold case had been scrapped on. And I had thought, well, they'll convert this into a wristwatch someday, which I never did. But I did get one of the Vortech wristwatches last month, try and get that centered up there. So, and I bought this partially because I wanted to put my own movements in it. And I had talked to RT about giving him some of my movements to case up and pay for, but I decided it'd be quicker and better for them if I just bought one of their existing watches and took it apart. And so I haven't taken it apart yet, but I did buy this one in their blackened case. And it's amusing how they blacken their case, which is they dip it in WD-40 and then put it in a 400-degree kiln, burn off the WD-40, and then repeat the process 10 to 20 times until they get the finish that they like, and then they call it good. But I have a number of different higher grade movements that I'd put in that I'll try putting in this thing, and can do that as another presentation. Vortech also did have a big event yesterday on Veterans Day where they released their wristwatches based on the 16 size A13 24-hour general civil time watch movements, and they, I think, sold pretty well. And there's actually a Channel 7 news program on it that went out yesterday that I haven't watched, but they were selling their conversions at $59.99 for the black titanium, and they did 15 in bronze that has a special engraving on it that says U.S. government. That is fairly rare for Hamilton watches, and they were pricing that at $7,995, and they sold all of those out within an hour or two. I don't know what their status is of the conventional ones, which they built 50 of, but they're hoping that they were going to get them all sold within yesterday. Anyway, people are leaving, so anybody else got anything they want to add?
Yeah, question time. I bought this vise. I trust you can see it.
Yes.
It weighs a ton, has a really nifty adjustment for the angle. You know, you can see that, and beautiful anchor shaped adjustment. Something's missing back here. No idea what it is, but something's definitely missing back there. There's a channel through here that presumably whatever was tied to this goes to. But anybody have any ideas? This is made by a company called Koch, K-O-C-H. It's Koch and CIE, so it's presumably French. But anyway, it weighs, as I say, weighs a ton, and it's kind of a nifty vise. Also, over the years, somebody has drilled little shallow holes on this side, but not on this side. So I don't know what that's about either. But it's a beautifully made little piece, and I'd be delighted to find out more about it if I could.
I can take a look in my antique horological tool books that that Ted Crom did. See if there's anything like that in there. I would assume that the holes drilled in there, they might have put in steel pins and used that for, either bending or trying to pull something together or pull it apart.
Yeah, hard to say. And I don't know, as I say, what that thing on the back, obviously there was something missing, but what it is, I don't know.
Well, we'll try and figure it out.
Yeah, this part here. Little anvil, nice little anvil on there.
Yeah, no, that's actually a very nice vise. So.
Yeah, and this adjustment is very strange. That's what controls the swing angle. Why they fashioned that handle in that shape, I have no idea.
So how does that mount onto a bench?
Right here.
Okay.
Yeah, there's your, and of course I'm missing the rod for that also.
Okay,
but,
well, that's an easy replacement.
Yeah, that part's easy. So.
Wow, nice.
Well, also I'm going to need to find a source. That Eaton watch really needs a 19 millimeter band, and 18s are easy to come by. 20s aren't that hard to come by, but I'm not having much luck finding a 19. So
I have bought watch bands from Otto Fry and Hodinkee, and those guys sell watch straps. You might look there because that's not an uncommon vintage size. Omega used it. I have a number of watches that are that irritating 19 millimeter lug width.
Me too. I think all of my Seikos are 19. So there are actually, plenty of sellers on eBay that sell 19 millimeters. I mean, not as many as 18 or 20, but enough. I think you'll find some if you just specifically search for 19 millimeters.
The other thing you might be able to do, I don't know if you'd really want to do this, is you could put a 20 millimeter NATO strap on it. I know that some of my watches with 19 millimeter lugs just throw my my slightly shrunken 20 millimeter Walmart NATO strap on them, and that works well enough.
Yeah, I've done that a lot too. Is use 20s on 19s.
Yeah, this is a 20. This is a leather 20 here, and it's not too bad.
But does it have spring bars or fixed lugs?
It has the lugs are pierced, but it does. It came with, there were spring bars in it.
Okay,
and that's what I'm using.
If it didn't have spring bars, then finding a 19 millimeter strap might be hard because there's just not that many suppliers for those fixed lug bar straps anymore. Really just a few, and finding a 19 millimeter one of those that could be hard. You might be doing some modification, but yeah, I think if you search for 19 millimeter on either Amazon or eBay, specifically search for 19, I think you'll find it. If you have trouble, let me know and I can send you some links because I know I've bought them.
Yeah, I think it's probably too early for a NATO strap. This to me looks like maybe, I don't know, 20s. That's 32 millimeter across there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, excluding the crown, of course. So it's pretty big for a watch of that vintage, it seems to me. And there's certain aspects of the construction inside that remind me of pocket watch type construction. So I suspect it's kind of early.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to try and find one more auction item on this Jones and Horan auction. They had a Benris Type 2 that went, and Dan showed.
That's the Type 2, like the second version of the Type 1 that I showed. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
I was following that auction. I was
okay.
bidding in that auction. You had mentioned Jones and Horan to me.
Yeah,
they had that particular auction. They had some nice items.
I also, after you had mentioned that, I started looking at, the Benris stuff, and I found that Type 1 they've reissued. They're
just like
they're
this
doing
last
a
week. I think it
What's
just
that?
came out. I think it just came out this week.
Okay.
Yeah, it's brand new. They've been talking about it for a long time, but I think I just saw it announced.
Okay.
Being sold by Hodinkee.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a site that I should pay attention to, but I don't. There's a whole slew of these sites that I should be looking at on like a weekly basis just to stay up to speed.
I don't really follow Hodinkee either, but I saw it, someone else mentioned it, and that's how I saw it. But I'd been hearing that I mean, Benrus just sort of was, came back to life a year or two ago. And so they've been, you know, making some of these heritage models.
Do you know who's relaunched the brand?
No, I don't. I mean, I just know some people bought the name, and they're trying to make something of it.
I mean, there's definitely a market for all these heritage brands in terms of being relaunched, and the Chinese, you know, are chasing some of them, but you know, a lot of them are Swiss, and you know, I forget, you know, like the Fossil Group owns one of the brands, maybe Zodiac or something like that.
Well, I think with Benrus, you know, they've got those military watches that are a nice, you know, the smaller ones, the you know, the but also the dive watches, and then the Sky Chief chronograph is sort of a, you know, has sort of a brand name to it that they could potentially do a reissue of something like that. So they could probably, you know, maybe do something with it. People are starting to really get a little too crazy with those type 1 and type 2. You probably saw the price that type 2 went to.
I was trying to find what it ended at. I stopped looking at it when it was at 1,200 or something.
Well, you know, it's gonna go for over 2,000, but I think it went for close to 3,000. And the problem for me was that the bezel was damaged, and so that's what I didn't like about it. So I was kind of surprised how much it went for with the damaged bezel.
The auctions have been, prices are robust. I bid on a lot of things in that auction, and the only one that I wound up getting was a Jules Jurgensen split second movement because I needed the hands to replace some rusted hands on a split second Jules Jurgensen that I bought from Bert Tolbert.
I only bought one thing. I bought this Speedmaster because it has this dial I really liked. This, you can see this dials turn brown.
Yes.
And there are two batches of Speedmasters in this 1969 issue, two relatively small batches where something about the lacquer that they applied wasn't stable and turned brown. And it's really brown. I mean, you can really see it. It's not just sort of like, oh, it's brown if I look at it under, you know, cross-eyed under like the right kind of lighting. So it really appealed to me. Oh, here's, you can see it next to another one from right the same era, but not the same batch. And so it's black. And so that was the only thing I bought at that auction. All the other things I was following just were too expensive. And I mean, this was expensive too, but I really wanted it.
The bezel looks really nice on that.
Well, the condition as a whole is really good, and it had the brown dial, so I was comfortable sort of paying up.
Going big on that one.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got it. So any suggestions on the next meeting's theme?
I did have, I mean, I had a thought. I don't know that I'd have much to contribute to it, but I was wondering, like, sort of like, what about like complicated and oddball watches would be maybe fun. I mean, I don't have many of those, but I bet some other people do.
So complicated would be split seconds, moon
I think,
phase,
you know, whatever
repeat,
anyone wants to, you know,
or mystery dial kinds of things.
Any kind of interpretation. Well, because mystery dial would definitely be sort of an oddball. You know, so I don't know. It was just a thought. I was actually trying to think of that because I was thinking you might need suggestions.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can do the standard, you know, brand themes, which include, you know, Omega and Zodiac.
Yeah, and brands would be great
Proton
too.
and other things like that.
I'd be totally happy with different brands as well.
You know, I suggest Omega because I have, that's probably the bulk of my collection, but I've also been to the Omega Museum 3 times now. So I've got, you know, more than enough pictures from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a handful of Omegas. I could show a few Omegas. Yeah.
Well, I like the idea of the oddball stuff, and maybe I'll do that next, and then we can go do Omega as a brand theme. And
well, thanks, Tim. I think I'm gonna signing off.
Sounds good. It's gone on for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on when you logged in. So thank you all for joining us again on this, and I'll try and get this uploaded as well as the others. Maybe on this one I won't bother editing the way I have tried to edit other things. Thank you all
Tim.
for listening to my rambling.
Thank you very much for organizing.
Perfectly all right. Yeah.
All that. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
See you in a month or so.